spoke to the former deputy chief at the Pima County Sheriff's Office who knew Sheriff Nanos for over 40 years. And he spoke to the effect that his ego, Nanos' ego, could actually be the primary reason as to why this case has not been solved. He wanted the limelight. He didn't want the FBI to get involved. He wanted this investigation to be the Pima.
The pacemaker's not reading. What do you mean not reading? I mean the signal cut at 2:28 just stopped. The technician's fingers moved across the medical monitoring interface, pulling up data streams that had been running continuously for months. Heart rhythm patterns, electrical impulses, Bluetooth connectivity logs, all the digital breadcrumbs that modern medicine leaves behind. Look at this spike at 2 a.m. That's not medical distress. That's movement, rapid movement. And then nothing? 28 minutes later, complete disconnection. By the time investigators realized what they were looking at, they understood something that would change everything about the Nancy Guthrie case. Her pacemaker hadn't just been keeping her alive, it had been recording her death. On January 31st, 2026, at exactly 2:28 a.m., an 84-year-old woman's medical device sent its final transmission to a cell phone tower in Tucson, Arizona. The signal carried data that would become the most precise evidence in a case that began with a simple missing person report and evolved into something far more sinister. Nancy Guthrie, mother of Today show host Savannah Guthrie, had vanished from her bed. But she hadn't vanished quietly. And in 2026, quiet disappearances are almost impossible when every device around us is designed to remember everything. This is the story of how medical technology became the ultimate witness to a crime that someone believed they had planned perfectly, and how that same technology may be the key to bringing Nancy Guthrie home. I'm your host with INVESTICRIME FILES, and this is the case that proves the most dangerous assumption any criminal can make is believing they can disappear someone without leaving a digital fingerprint. Nancy Guthrie was a creature of habit.
Mom, you guys came here in the 70s and you'd been moving all around. What made you want to stay in Tucson and plant roots?
And so wonderful. Just the air, the quality of life is laid back and gentle. Yeah, I like to watch the javelina eat my plants.
But the best thing about Tucson is coming home and
Yes.
seeing you guys. Should we raise a glass? Prickly pear margarita? Cheers.
Cheers.
Love you.
Love you.
At 84, she had settled into the kind of predictable routine that elderly people often develop for safety and comfort. Every evening, she would pull into her garage at almost exactly the same time, use the automatic door opener, and enter her house through the interior door that led to her laundry room and kitchen. She rarely used her front door. She avoided the back door entirely, which required navigating steps that had become difficult with her deteriorating back condition. On good days, she could walk to her mailbox. Most days, even that was a struggle. This routine created something investigators didn't initially realize would become crucial: an automated digital log of her final night. January 31st, 9:48 p.m. Nancy's garage door opened as she returned home from what would be her last normal evening. At 9:50 p.m., the door closed behind her blue Subaru. The house settled into its usual quiet. But while Nancy prepared for bed, her pacemaker continued its constant monitoring, creating a second-by-second record of her heart rate, electrical patterns, and most importantly, her movement through Bluetooth connectivity to her iPhone. For anyone planning to make someone disappear, this created an unexpected problem. Medical devices don't sleep, they don't forget, and they timestamp everything. What happened between 9:50 p.m. on January 31st and 2:28 a.m. on February 1st would have remained a complete mystery in any previous decade. But Nancy Guthrie lived in the age of digital medicine, where pacemakers communicate constantly with smartphones, creating an unalterable record of a person's final hours. The data tells a story that no amount of scene manipulation could change. For nearly 4.5 hours after Nancy arrived home, her pacemaker recorded normal patterns. Heart rate consistent with someone watching television, moving around a house, preparing for bed. The Bluetooth connection between her pacemaker and iPhone remained stable, indicating she stayed within the normal range of her home. Then, at approximately 2 a.m., everything changed. The pacemaker registered sudden, dramatic movement, not the gradual shift you'd see if someone was getting up to use the bathroom or check a noise. This was rapid, intense activity, the kind of spike medical devices record when patients are suddenly awakened, suddenly afraid, suddenly fighting. The pattern continued for 28 minutes. 28 minutes of elevated readings, suggesting Nancy was conscious, moving, possibly struggling, until 2:28 a.m., when the Bluetooth connection between her pacemaker and her phone severed completely. For federal investigators who would later analyze this data, those timestamps became the foundation of everything they knew for certain about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Someone was in her house during that 28-minute window. Nancy was alive and moving during that time. And whatever happened at 2:28 a.m. was significant enough to either break her pacemaker's connection to her phone or move her beyond its Bluetooth range. The digital witness had spoken. Now, investigators needed to figure out what it was saying. When family members arrived at Nancy's house on February 1st and found her missing, the scene they discovered seemed to tell a story of careful planning rather than chaotic violence. The front door was propped open, but not broken or damaged. The back door was similarly positioned, reportedly held open with flower pots. This wasn't the frantic scene of a break-in gone wrong. These doors had been deliberately positioned by someone who wanted easy, silent entry and exit. More telling was what investigators found on the front porch. Blood, later confirmed through DNA analysis to be Nancy's. The stains suggested violence had occurred, but the pattern didn't indicate a prolonged struggle in that location. Instead, it appeared someone had been moved across the porch area while bleeding. The Ring doorbell camera had been removed entirely. Not destroyed or damaged, but carefully taken, suggesting someone who understood the difference between eliminating evidence and creating more evidence through destruction. But perhaps most revealing was what investigators found inside the house. Nothing. Nancy's bedroom, where family members said she had been taken from her bed, was immaculate. No overturned furniture, no scattered belongings, no signs of the kind of struggle you would expect when an 84-year-old woman with mobility issues is forcibly removed from her home. The scene suggested someone who either had exceptional control over the situation or exceptional knowledge of how to move through Nancy's house without creating chaos. This level of precision would become increasingly important as the investigation developed. If you're finding this analysis helpful, make sure to subscribe to INVESTICRIME Files for more deep dives into cases where digital evidence tells stories that traditional forensics might miss. The Pima County Sheriff's Department made decisions in the first 72 hours that would haunt the investigation for months. These weren't decisions born from malice or laziness, but from something potentially more dangerous: inexperience handling cases of this magnitude. The lead detective had never worked a homicide investigation. The most senior investigator involved had less than 2 years of experience with the department. While the FBI would eventually take over federal aspects of the case, crucial early choices about evidence collection, scene preservation, and investigative priorities were being made by people who had never faced a potential murder case involving a victim with national media connections. The consequences became apparent quickly. The welcome mat on Nancy's front porch, where blood evidence was clearly visible, wasn't collected for forensic analysis until days later. By the time technicians attempted to retrieve it, any trace evidence that might have included footprints, fiber transfers, or DNA from an attacker had been compromised by weather, foot traffic from investigators, and natural degradation. Nancy's garage, site where she parked every single evening and where any attacker would have needed to understand her routines, wasn't fully processed with alternative light sources that might have revealed trace evidence invisible to the naked eye. The blue Subaru was removed for analysis, but the space itself, potentially rich with footprints, tool marks, or other physical evidence, wasn't treated with the thoroughness a case of this profile demanded. These weren't just procedural oversights. They represented lost opportunities to gather evidence that might have quickly narrowed the suspect pool or provided direct forensic links to whoever was responsible for Nancy's disappearance. But while local investigators struggled with crime scene processing, federal agencies were quietly beginning work that would prove far more sophisticated and ultimately more revealing. 3 days into the investigation, something unexpected happened that initially seemed to provide the breakthrough everyone was hoping for. Ransom notes began arriving. But these weren't typical kidnapping communications. Instead of being sent directly to Nancy's family, the demands went to media outlets. TMZ received an email demanding 1 Bitcoin in exchange for Nancy's return. Local television stations received similar communications. The messages included a specific Bitcoin wallet address and deadlines for payment. Nancy Guthrie, appearing on her own television show, made a public statement that demonstrated both her desperation
We received your
and her
message,
willingness to
and we
cooperate.
understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
This is very valuable to us and we will pay. But the FBI's specialized cryptocurrency analysis team was already identifying problems with these communications that suggested something more complex than a straightforward kidnapping for ransom. Traditional kidnapping cases follow predictable patterns developed over decades of criminal behavior. Kidnappers want immediate payment to minimize their exposure time. They maintain regular communication to sustain leverage. They provide proof of life to demonstrate they can deliver on their promises. Most critically, they want direct contact with families who have access to money, not public negotiations through media channels. The Nancy Guthrie ransom notes violated virtually every one of these patterns. The demands came days after the disappearance, not hours. No subsequent communication followed the initial demands. No proof of life was ever provided. The communications went to journalists rather than family members who could actually facilitate payment. Most revealing of all, the Bitcoin wallet address provided in the ransom notes never received a single transaction. Despite public statements from Nancy Guthrie indicating willingness to pay and substantial media coverage of the demands, no money was ever sent to the specified address. This created an uncomfortable possibility that investigators had to consider. Were the ransom notes legitimate demands from Nancy's kidnapper, or were they misdirection designed to make the crime appear to be something it wasn't? While public attention focused on the Bitcoin addresses and media coverage of the ransom demands, federal investigators were quietly mapping something far more comprehensive: the complete digital ecosystem surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. In 2026, making someone vanish requires defeating dozens of interconnected systems that constantly monitor, record, and timestamp human activity. The FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey team began reconstructing not just January 31st, but weeks of digital activity patterns around Nancy's neighborhood. Cell phone towers maintain logs of every device that comes within range, creating location histories for any phone that was powered on during the critical time frame. Traffic cameras capture license plate data with timestamps that can track vehicle movements along major routes. Ring doorbells from neighboring houses record motion and activity that might not directly show a crime, but could indicate unusual patterns of behavior in the days leading up to the disappearance. Gas stations, convenience stores, and other businesses maintained security camera footage that can track vehicles and individuals moving through the area. Credit card transactions create digital breadcrumbs of purchases that might seem innocent individually, but could reveal patterns when analyzed collectively. The investigation expanded beyond just January 31st to include what federal analysts call pattern development. If Nancy's disappearance was planned rather than spontaneous, there should be digital evidence of reconnaissance activity in the days or weeks before she vanished. Who was in Nancy's neighborhood repeatedly during late-night hours? Which vehicles appeared on traffic cameras along multiple routes that could serve as escape paths? Whose cell phones showed unusual movement patterns during time frames that aligned with both potential scouting visits and the actual disappearance? This type of analysis doesn't produce dramatic television moments of sudden revelation. Instead, it creates statistical probability maps that can gradually narrow the universe of possible suspects from thousands of people to dozens, and potentially from dozens to a handful. But it requires something the Bitcoin addresses couldn't provide: actual activity to analyze. As weeks turned into months and the digital analysis continued, investigators began identifying patterns that raised uncomfortable questions about one of the most basic assumptions in the case:
out of a vehicle
that
window
Nancy Guthrie
screaming.
had been
The
taken
vehicle
by a
was a dark gray or
stranger.
blue Chevy Malibu, no plate. Advised that the female was hanging out of the window wearing all black, and the door was also open.
Was the
The precision of the crime scene staging troubled experienced investigators. The careful positioning of propped doors, the removal rather than destruction of security cameras, the ability to move through Nancy's house without creating chaos. These details suggested someone who either had exceptional skill in covert operations or exceptional knowledge of Nancy's home and routines. The timing was equally revealing. Nancy maintained a fairly predictable schedule. She went to bed at consistent times. Her house followed routines that would be observable to anyone who had reason to watch her patterns over time. The 28-minute window captured by her pacemaker data suggested someone who knew exactly when and how to act. Most significantly, the crime occurred with no apparent digital preparation that would be expected from a stranger. No evidence emerged of unknown individuals conducting surveillance in the neighborhood. No suspicious vehicles appeared repeatedly on traffic cameras in the weeks before the disappearance. No cell phone data indicated strangers spending time near Nancy's house learning her routines. So this absence of digital evidence for external surveillance began shifting investigative focus toward a more difficult possibility: that whoever took Nancy Guthrie already knew her routines well enough that extended observation wasn't necessary. But investigating people close to a victim requires different techniques than hunting unknown suspects. It requires analyzing relationships, motives, access, and opportunity among people who had legitimate reasons to be familiar with Nancy's life. And those investigations are often more legally complex, more emotionally fraught, and more difficult to resolve than cases involving clear external threats. The FBI's cryptocurrency analysis team represents one of the most sophisticated financial investigation capabilities in federal law enforcement. These analysts have traced funds through complex blockchain networks, identified terrorist financing operations, and recovered millions of dollars from ransomware attacks. But the Nancy Guthrie case presented them with a unique problem: a Bitcoin address that never received a transaction. Every cryptocurrency address has a unique string of numbers and letters that functions like a bank account number. Every transaction that involves that address is permanently recorded on a public blockchain, creating an unalterable history of all financial activity. When money moves through cryptocurrency networks, federal analysts can track its path across multiple platforms, identify when it's converted to traditional currency, and often determine who ultimately receives the funds. This process has led to numerous arrests in cases involving online crime, international money laundering, and ransomware operations. Criminals who believe cryptocurrency provides anonymity often discover that blockchain technology actually creates more detailed financial records than traditional banking. But tracking requires movement, and the Bitcoin address provided in the Nancy Guthrie ransom notes never showed any activity whatsoever. No money was ever sent to the address. No funds were ever transferred out of it. No cryptocurrency exchanges recorded any activity associated with the wallet. The address existed, but it remained completely inactive throughout the entire period when ransom demands were allegedly active. For cryptocurrency analysts, this pattern was highly unusual. But legitimate ransom operations typically involve some transaction activity, even if families ultimately choose not to pay. Scam operations often receive small amounts from multiple sources. Test transactions are common, as people verify addresses before sending larger amounts. The complete absence of any blockchain activity associated with the Nancy Guthrie ransom demands began supporting a theory that the cryptocurrency requests were never intended to be fulfilled. Instead, they might have been designed to create the appearance of a financially motivated kidnapping, while directing investigative attention away from other motives. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker recorded data with precision that criminal investigators could only dream of achieving through traditional forensic techniques. Unlike eyewitness testimony, which can be unreliable, or physical evidence, which can be contaminated or misinterpreted, medical device data provides timestamp-accurate information that's nearly impossible to falsify or alter. The pacemaker logged every heartbeat, every electrical impulse, every moment of unusual activity with medical-grade precision. When investigators gained access to this data, they could reconstruct Nancy's final hours with a level of detail that no other type of evidence could provide. The device showed normal patterns until approximately 2 a.m. on February 1st. Heart rate consistent with someone who was sleeping or resting. No indication of medical distress or unusual activity. Then the data revealed rapid, dramatic changes. Elevated heart rate, irregular patterns consistent with fear or physical stress, a movement significant enough to register on monitoring equipment designed to track cardiac patients during normal daily activities. These changes continued for exactly 28 minutes until the Bluetooth connection between Nancy's pacemaker and her iPhone was severed at 2:28 a.m. For investigators, this data provided something rare in missing person cases: absolute certainty about timing. They knew Nancy was alive and conscious at 2 a.m. They knew she experienced some form of distress that elevated her heart rate and caused significant physical movement. They knew this activity continued until 2:28 a.m., when either her pacemaker malfunctioned, her phone was moved beyond Bluetooth range, or Nancy herself was moved beyond that range. Most importantly, they knew that whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie occurred during those specific 28 minutes. Every other theory about her disappearance had to account for medical device data that provided an unalterable timeline. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for INVESTICRIME Files. We're diving deep into cases where technology tells stories that witnesses can't. Nancy Guthrie's garage door opener maintained automatic logs of every activation, creating an unexpected digital record of her final evening. These systems, standard in modern homes, record timestamps for opening and closing cycles as part of their normal operation. The data showed Nancy arrived home on January 31st at 9:48 p.m. The door opened automatically as she approached. I remained open for exactly 2 minutes while she pulled her blue Subaru into the garage, then closed at 9:50 p.m. No subsequent activity occurred until investigators arrived the following day. This simple data point eliminated numerous theories that had emerged in the early days of the investigation. Nancy had definitely made it home safely. She had followed her normal routine of parking in the garage and entering through the interior door. The garage remained secure until law enforcement arrived. But this information also created investigative challenges that wouldn't become apparent until later. Nancy's habit of using the garage entrance exclusively meant that anyone planning to intercept her would need specific knowledge of her routines. A random attacker waiting near her front door would have waited all night without ever encountering her. Someone planning to break in through the back door would have had to navigate difficult terrain that Nancy herself avoided. The precision required to know exactly when and where to intercept Nancy suggested either extensive surveillance or prior knowledge of her habits. However, the garage itself became a source of frustration for federal investigators who eventually took over the case. The space where Nancy parked every single night, where any attacker would have needed to understand the layout and timing, hadn't been processed with the thoroughness that a case of this magnitude demanded. Alternative light sources that might have revealed footprints invisible to the naked eye weren't used initially. That trace evidence that could have shown whether unknown individuals had been in the garage wasn't collected systematically. Tool marks, fiber transfers, or other physical evidence that might have provided direct links to suspects weren't preserved according to federal standards. By the time experienced federal crime scene technicians gained access to the garage, the opportunity to collect time-sensitive evidence had passed. 61 days after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, federal investigators had developed something that local law enforcement initially lacked: a comprehensive data-driven profile of the crime. The pacemaker data provided an unalterable timeline. The garage door logs confirmed Nancy's arrival and established that she had followed her normal routine. Cell tower analysis had mapped digital activity in the neighborhood during the critical time frame. Traffic camera reviews had identified vehicle patterns along potential escape routes. Most significantly, the complete absence of digital evidence for external surveillance had shifted investigative focus towards suspects who wouldn't have needed extended observation to understand Nancy's routines. This wasn't a dramatic moment of breakthrough, but rather the slow accumulation of evidence that gradually narrowed the universe of possibilities. In modern investigations, solutions often emerge through statistical elimination rather than sudden revelation. The Bitcoin addresses remained inactive, supporting theories that the ransom notes were misdirection rather than legitimate demands. The precision of the crime scene staging continued to suggest either exceptional skill or exceptional knowledge. The timing of the attack indicated someone who understood Nancy's patterns without needing to conduct obvious reconnaissance. Each piece of evidence alone might have been inconclusive. Together, they created a profile that pointed towards someone with legitimate access to information about Nancy's daily life, her home layout, her physical limitations, and her predictable routines. And that profile narrowed the suspect pool dramatically from unknown strangers to people who had specific reasons to possess detailed knowledge about Nancy Guthrie's life. Today, Nancy Guthrie remains missing. The $1.2 million reward for information leading to her whereabouts remains unclaimed. The Bitcoin wallet addresses from the ransom notes remain inactive. The pacemaker data remains the most precise evidence in a case built on precision. But federal investigators continue their methodical work, analyzing data streams that most people don't realize exist, and correlating evidence in ways that weren't possible even a decade ago. The FBI's cryptocurrency analysis team monitors blockchain activity related to the case, ready to spring into action if any financial transactions occur that might provide new leads. Digital forensic specialists continue processing cellular data, traffic camera footage, and other electronic evidence that might reveal patterns invisible to traditional investigative techniques. Most importantly, behavioral analysts continue developing profiles that help focus investigative resources on the most promising leads rather than pursuing every possible theory equally. Modern criminal investigations often look like office work rather than dramatic confrontations. Analysts spend hours reviewing digital data, correlating timestamps, mapping communication patterns, and building statistical models that can guide investigators toward the most likely suspects. But this methodical approach has also proven remarkably effective at solving cases that might have remained mysteries in previous decades. Digital evidence doesn't forget, doesn't change its story under pressure, and doesn't suffer from the reliability issues that can affect human witnesses. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker has already provided investigators with information that no other type of evidence could have offered. Her garage door logs have established facts that eyewitness accounts might have gotten wrong. Cell tower data has created maps of activity that traditional surveillance might have missed. The most important lesson from the Nancy Guthrie case may be how thoroughly modern life has become documented by systems that most people don't think about consciously. Medical devices monitor our health and create permanent records of our physical activity. Garage door openers log our arrival and departure times. Cell phones communicate constantly with towers that record our movements. Traffic cameras capture our vehicles. Credit cards document our purchases. Anyone planning a crime in 2026 isn't just competing against traditional investigative techniques like fingerprint analysis or eyewitness identification. They're competing against an entire ecosystem of digital monitoring that operates constantly, records everything, and never forgets. Nancy Guthrie's case demonstrates both the power and the limitations of this digital ecosystem. Her pacemaker provided investigators with precise timing that traditional forensics couldn't have offered. Her garage door logs established facts that might otherwise have remained uncertain. Cell tower analysis mapped activity patterns that conventional surveillance would have missed. But digital evidence still requires skilled interpretation, proper collection, and systematic analysis. The most sophisticated monitoring systems in the world can't compensate for investigative inexperience, inadequate resource allocation, or procedural errors that compromise evidence collection. The Nancy Guthrie case continues because digital evidence has provided investigators with questions that still need answers, patterns that still need interpretation, and leads that still need careful development. But the same technology that recorded Nancy's final moments continues working every day, creating the kind of comprehensive digital record that makes modern disappearances increasingly difficult to execute and increasingly likely to be solved. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker couldn't save her life, but it may ultimately be what brings her home. The device that monitored her heart rhythm for months became an unalterable witness to her final conscious moments, creating a digital record that no amount of careful planning could erase or falsify. At 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, that witness stopped recording. But the evidence it preserved continues guiding investigators toward the truth about what happened during those critical 28 minutes, when an 84-year-old woman's life changed forever. The investigation continues. The data doesn't lie. And somewhere in the growing digital file that documents every device activation, every communication attempt, every financial transaction, and every movement pattern related to this case, the evidence exists to bring Nancy Guthrie home. Technology has made the perfect crime nearly impossible. But now it's up to investigators to read what the devices have been recording all along. This is INVESTICRIME Files, reminding you that in the digital age, everything leaves a trace, and traces can be followed home. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Someone knows something. And in 2026, digital evidence is making it increasingly difficult to keep secrets forever. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into cases where technology reveals truths that traditional evidence might miss. Until next time, keep questioning, keep analyzing, and remember that justice often emerges from the data points that criminals never realize they're leaving behind.